In fact, Times Now earlier spoke to Salil Shetty. This is what he told us.
Keynote speaker at the UNGA 70 alongside Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the Amnesty International, Salil Shetty, sits right next to me, and we're going to ask him some straight questions on what is sustainable development, why sustainable development over MDG, and of course his point of view on UNSC and nations like India pushing for a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. Salil, first up, thanks for talking to us. First question, sustainable development. What's the concept and why is it more evolved and perhaps the way to go?
I think, I worked personally on the Millennium Development Goals at the UN myself. So I think first we have to acknowledge that there have been incredible achievements, and I think everybody can be proud of what's happened with the Millennium Development Goals. It brought the countries together. It gave it a kind of common push. But there were many lacunae or deficits at the end of that. I think two or three I wanted to highlight. Number one is that we still have a lot of people living in poverty, still suffering from ill health, disease, illiteracy. So almost a third of the population in many countries are still left behind. So the Sustainable Development Goals, a big theme in that is leave no one behind. So that's one. Second is, the accountability was problematic because it's one thing for governments to come here and sign and declarations and speeches, but what happens on the ground? How do you make it enforceable and tangible benefits for people who are at the bottom of the pyramid? So I think the Sustainable Development Goals are trying to take care of that. The other dimension is that it's trying to take a more comprehensive approach, because the focus in the Millennium Development Goals, you had poverty eradication, but the economic growth and infrastructure, etc., was seen as separate. It's a good thing now that we're seeing the two together, because at the end of the day, economic growth has to benefit people. So I think it's promising. The question is, a lot of the challenges are at the implementation stage.
So you think implementation is being addressed, and how much is it that it bridges the gap between developed nations, developing nations in terms of consumption of energy? Because if you're looking at using only as much as humanity today needs so that you preserve and you don't actually jeopardize the future of humanity, you're also looking at alternative forms of consumption of energy, But does that compromise the developing nations?
No, so that's a key point, I think, that when we look at the consistency and coherence, like we can't talk about sustainable development goals and ignore the fact that there's massive disparity between rich countries and poor countries, including on the points you're making. It's also the case that, the world is facing a massive global refugee crisis. The